Hi everyone, it is time to start a new weekly vlog. This week I have a couple of mandatory reads that I have to read, and I'm just going to kind of focus on those and have somewhat of a realistic reading week. I've done a few reading challenges over the last few weeks, and I'm ready to just kind of not be pushing so hard on my reading. I loved making those challenges. They were so much fun. But for this week, I'm just going to focus on the books that I absolutely need to read and just kind of see how fast I read them. See how far I get through the week. I only need to read these two books. If I end up reading more, that's great, but we're just gonna kind of go with the vibes of the week. Now, that being said, I've already read some because I am currently on sprints for Me A Book Club, but before that, I had Patreon sprints because it's Monday. So on my 5 hours of Patreon sprints, I ended up reading Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadband. This book I'm using for a Fabelin prompt. I'm also using this for every romantasy, so there's a couple of reasons why I want to read this. It's on Timmy's TBR for the month. It's a lot of reasons. And during that time, I made it to 24% of this book. So in this book, we follow Tisana, and Tisana, we find out, was captured as a young child when there was a war in her town. They killed her whole village and took her. She has the ability to have some powers because she is able to have powers. I don't know the full extent of it, but she's of a race of people that have powers. They take her and basically make her a slave, and she performs in different aspects for the person who owns her with her magic. We also kind of have glimpses that obviously as a slave, some horrible things did happen to her as part of being a slave. She, at a very young age, tried to buy her freedom very naively and was told, I will give you your freedom if you have 1,000 gold pieces. And at the very start of the book, we see her performing. She gets a tip that puts her over those 1,000 pieces. She goes to her owner and basically tries to buy her freedom. He loses it. He starts attacking her, whipping her, never thinking she would ever actually reach this astronomical amount, but she has now. She uses her magic and kills him and then goes on the run to meet with the Order. What the Order does, I'm not 100% sure at this point in time, but they have some sort of magical abilities, and she needs to become an apprentice in order to join the Order. Right now, she is an apprentice, and her mentor is Max. And I do believe that that is going to be our love interest in this book, and that is the only part that I'm a bit concerned about, and I'll explain why in a minute. I am loving the world building in this book. I'm loving the pacing of this book. My one issue with Serpents and the Wings of Night was that it was so fast-paced. You had no time to get to know the characters and really understand them and really care about them. There was no breaks in it. We were just full tilt the whole time. This book is much better paced for me as a character-focused reader. My only problem is what I think is going to be the romance, and that is slightly my fault, but it's the way the book led me. I did at one point know that this was a mentor-mentee romance. I did. When I did every romantasy, I knew that. But I had forgotten that for when I went to pick up the book. So when they take her to Max, they describe him as retired from the Order, and he is now living away in a cottage in the woods tending his garden. In my head, I instantly pictured an older person, like a senior citizen type older person, like old. A mentor, a very elder kind of father, grandfather figure. That is not the case, but my brain has latched onto that as the visual. And I can't unsee it. I can't unsee it. So I'm not really shipping these characters at the moment. I'm seeing them more as like a grandfather and granddaughter thing, and that's not what they are. But my brain cannot unsee it. I can't unsee it. I can't unsee it. So that's my only concern now at 24% in, is that I don't know how I'm going to feel about the romance. Maybe I can try and change this picture in my head, but I haven't gotten there yet. That being said, I'm going to put this down for the rest of the night because I am on B&K Book Club sprints, and I need to start the B&K Book Club, which is Sherry Lapina's What Have You Done? Since I haven't started this, I don't really know that much about it, so I will wait until I've read a little bit of it to talk to you about it, and I will come back to you sometime tomorrow with how this is going. So I just made it to 50% of the Sherry Lapina book, What Have You Done? I read about 70 pages last night on sprints and another 70-ish this morning. I am now at page 157. In this book, we follow a very small town, which is very common for a Shari Lapena story. A lot of hers take place in like a suburban town or a small town. A farmer is going out to his field when he sees vultures, turkey vultures circling the sky. He thinks there's an animal dead in his field. He goes out to see what it is and finds a young teenage girl. She has obviously been murdered. He calls the police. They come out. They know exactly who it is. It is Diana Brewster. It's a very small town. People do not necessarily lock their doors at night. They trust their neighbors. And now this has happened. And they don't know who to trust. Who in their community did this to this young girl? The police start looking into the community. They look into teachers at her school. They look into her boyfriend. They look into her friends, into maybe suspicious characters that came to her part-time job, and they are trying to figure out who murdered her. We follow so many perspectives. Basically, we're switching perspectives like every page and seeing how everybody in this small town is really racked by what has happened. We even have a few perspectives from Diana herself looking on to the aftermath of her death in some sort of paranormal way. This book is a vibe. It's a vibe. You want to just keep finding out what's going on. We are all reading this so quickly. Kelsey's almost done. I know Bethany just finished. We all started it last night. Like, we are flying through this book because you just want to see what happens next. It has short chapters and you're like, oh, I'll just do another chapter. I'll just find out what happens. And you're just turning and turning and turning. I have some suspicions based off reading a plethora of thrillers as to who the culprits may be. But you know what? There's so many possibilities and so many people that you probably least expect that it could be, because you know what? That's always who it is. We've all seen on the news when they're like, I would have never expected it of blank, the neighbor or whatever. And it's always the ones you never expect. It really feels like you are just unwrapping this mystery along with them in like the first 48 to 72 hours of her murder. And I just cannot wait to continue this. I am going to end this vlog clip and jump. Currently on Thursday sprints, and I just finished What Have You Done? I read nothing after the power went out in that last update. I have not touched this book until today. Tuesday, the power was out, and I ended up just like chatting with my family while we were all in the house waiting for the power to come back on. And then Wednesday is my day where I kind of take the day off, don't read. I'm out doing family things and I'm just like not around to read. So I did finish this up, and unfortunately this ended exactly how I thought it was going to end, which I didn't mention in the last update because I wasn't sure if I was falling into like some traps or some red herrings. But if you go back and look at the spoiler tags on B&K, you will see that I guessed this entire mystery very early on, maybe around the 30-page point. And then around the middle point, I guessed another aspect of this mystery. I guessed it very, very early. And I don't think it was hard to guess. I think it was very, very obvious what was happening. And I don't necessarily blame Shari Lapena for that. There's a couple of things that the publisher decided to do with the book that I think made certain things a little bit more obvious. I'm not going to go any further into that than that point because I don't want to spoil it for somebody else who does want to pick up this book. But because I was so focused on what I thought was happening, it made it less interesting following what the police and what her friends were doing in the latter half of this book, because I was just so sure that like this was just all fluff and not really what was happening with the mystery. And I did end up being correct, and it did take away from my enjoyment of the second half of this book. However, I do think overall it was a fun time, so I'm going to give it a 3.5 star. I'm not going to say too much more on that because, again, I don't want to spoil this thriller for those who are interested in it. But if you want to know my exact thoughts with all the spoilers, they are in the B&K Discord, which is always linked down below. Now I am going to jump back into Daughter of No Worlds. I am currently still at the 22, 24, what percentage was I at? 24% the last time I updated on this. I haven't picked it up since. But since I did update you and I did mention that I was picturing our male protagonist much older than he actually is in the book, and I explained why, I told Rainey that, and I also talked to Brie on Sprints about it today. Rainey sent me some fan art of the main male character to put a different image in my head, and Brie told me to think Ewan McGregor. So I'm just going to try and look at the fan art, think Ewan McGregor, and change my perception of how my brain has put this image of this man in my head for the rest of this book. Luckily, I haven't hit smut yet, so hopefully I can change what my brain is picturing this man as so that it works for me when we get to that point. So that's going to be my goal as I go into the rest of this book, and I should hopefully finish this either tomorrow or Saturday. I'd love to finish it tomorrow, but there's a lot of book left, so we'll see how it goes. I talked to you, I was going to read Daughter of No Worlds, which I did read 10% more of this, but I'm going to hold off on updating for a little bit longer. When I woke up this morning, Samantha and I decided that we were ready to finish our buddy read of One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. If you saw my vlog last week, you would have seen me read the first bit of this in that vlog, and it floated over into this week. I didn't mention it in the start of this vlog because I didn't actually know if we were going to get to it this week. I wasn't really sure. This buddy read has been very laid back, which has been lovely. We both kind of needed a laid back buddy read due to stuff going on, and we've just been doing one act at a time, and once both of us read it, we moved on. So today we read Act 5 and the epilogue, which was 5 extra pages. So I think I read about 116 pages of this today. And that's all I've read today. I've basically just been focusing on this. Now, again, if you saw that vlog last week, you would have known that I was loving this book when I think I finished Act 2 or Act 3, somewhere in there. I was halfway through, and I was having a fabulous time. I was really loving the writing style. I was really loving this faded love story that was forced to be not possible. My emotions were all tangled in all the ways. Something tragic had just happened. I was so sad, and I was really invested in the story. However, from about the 50% point onward, this book definitely changed in what it was focusing on. It was really focusing on these two battling families. And yes, that was part of the first part of this book, but the first part had more of the love story. This was just more of the vendetta and the magic that went with it, and everybody having plans on how they wanted to handle what was going on. And it really felt a little bit all over the place, to me at least. It felt like we would have a moment of this is what's happening, and then the next scene would come in and be never mind, no, this is what's happening, and no, never mind, this is what's happening. And over and over and over and over and over again. It was just everywhere. It was nope, that's not what's happening. This is, never mind, you're wrong, this is, and nobody even in the story seemed to know what was happening, and I didn't either, and I stopped caring. Eventually, I just really didn't care what was happening any longer, and my love for these characters just dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. With that, the first part of this book was looking like a 5-star, and I do really like the writing style of that part, so I ended up coming out at a 3-star rating. Would I recommend this as somebody's first Olivia Blake? No, I don't think it's her best. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. 3 stars. The beginning was great. The middle and ending were just kind of slowly a downhill decline. But I did want to mention it because this is a realistic reading week vlog, and this is what I read this week. So now that I've finished this off and completed that, I'm going to jump back into Daughter of No Worlds. I still have a few hours today where I will potentially read. So I'm hoping that I might get to the 50% point of Daughter of No Worlds. And honestly, at this point, I'm kind of thinking that might be as far as I go with that book. I'm leaning towards a DNF, but I do need to reach 51% because it is for Fablin. So I will decide fully if I want to DNF when I get to the 51% point. And if I do decide to DNF, I will come and tell you why at that point, because I want to let it simmer a little bit more. I only read about 6% more than the last time I talked to you, and I was really liking the plotting more. I was having a hard time with the relationship. The next 6% did not help that at all. And actually, there's a couple other things that started to not work for me. They were in the first part of the book, but they started to exasperate now that I'm seeing them longer and longer happening. But again, I'm going to hold off. I'm going to hold off on deciding to do that until I reach the 51% point. So I will come back regardless at 51% and talk to you about that and what I'm feeling and kind of where I'm deciding to go. So I did end up DNFing Daughter of No Worlds, and really for the last 10% that I actually read to get to the 51%, I was just listening to it, if that makes sense. I wasn't really engaged in the story. I was kind of checked out and just pushing myself to get to 51% for Fabelin points. There are many a reason this book did not work for me. First of all was the language barrier between our main character and her love interest, Max. Tisana at the start of this book is tough as nails. She is in slavery. She's buying her way out of it. She gets out of it. She has to flee. She flees while she is sick. She has an infection from being beaten. She flees. She collapses on this order's doorstep. She is so strong. But she does speak a different language. And when she speaks, because she doesn't know the language, it's very broken and it makes her sound so timid. And I was like, where is this tough as nails character that I saw at the start of the book? Like, what happened? Where did she go? I'm missing that. When she was in her internal head, you would get it, but you wouldn't get it when she was talking to the leaders of the order, to Max, to anyone else. And I did not love that. I also have read books in the past where there is a language barrier, Ice Planet 4 being one of them. And that did not work for me there, and it did not work for me here. There's already a power dynamic issue in this book with a mentor-mentee love interest, which I think if you look too closely at it gets exasperated by the fact that she had some really hard things happen with the person who owned her before. And she kind of looked at him as a good owner, even though he did horrible things to her due to psychological trauma. And I think that is making her susceptible to a power dynamic relationship, which again, I don't love. But when there is a language barrier, it even exacerbates this power dynamic because they cannot really communicate and he holds more power over her. Which for those who love Max, I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't get past it. I'm sorry. I couldn't. I know you love him and that's okay. Also, with a language barrier situation, you have no banter. Banter is not possible when you can't speak the same language. And in a romance, I want banter. And honestly, in most of my books, I want banter. Like even in an epic fantasy, I love when characters have a little banter. I love when they are sarcastic and witty and funny. And that's what I love. And you can't get that with this language barrier. And I was hoping maybe we would have a time jump where she would have had a chance to learn the language and we still hadn't hit it. So I'm moving on. Also, I can never really see him as young and hot. My brain just never could go there. So those are the two main reasons. But also, this is the third Carissa Broadband book I have read, and the only one I've liked is Six Scorched Roses, and I think I like that because it was Beauty and the Beast. So I am starting to think that Carissa Broadband is just not an author for me, writing style and plotting wise. And I may just have to move on from the author. And I think I pretty much decided to do that, is that this will be my last Carissa Broadband book. One thing I did say though about this book at the beginning, and I still stand by this, is I preferred the pacing of this book to the pacing of Serpents. I almost wish you could take the pacing and plotting of this book and the characters from Serpents and put them together into the same story. I would have really probably enjoyed that if I could like copy paste that together. However, this is the end of our realistic reading week. I did not read that much this week, but I did finish 2 books and DNF'd a third. So it wasn't a complete loss, but I need to move on to the next vlog because I just started Timmy's TBR-a-thon with my patrons. So I'm going to close this one out here and go do my first roll for that. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.